Most of all, thank you for dialing in today for the General's Ladies virtual fall tea. We do wish we could all be together this year. Hopefully, we'll all be together next year. We miss being with you in person. We do take this time please take this time to make sure your microphones are muted. And if during the presentation you have any questions, please use the chat feature as Tom has mentioned, and he will be able to answer questions. At this time, I would like to introduce our Executive Director, Tom Emmett. Tom has been with us since June of 2019. He lives just 3 blocks from the Dodge House, so we're very fortunate with that. And he has a passion for history. He holds a bachelor's and a master's in history, as well as a master's in divinity. Tom is very grateful for the hard work of the Generals and the Board of Trustees. He also very much works hand in hand with, or hand in glove, with Michelle Herdlicha. I hope I didn't massacre that, too bad. He also very much enjoys, Michelle is our operations manager. Today, Tom will introduce us to Mrs. Ruth Ann Dodge and talk a little about the Ruth Ann Dodge Memorial. Thank you so much for being with us today. And Tom.
Thank you very much, Jan. It's good to be here. It's good to be with all of you in this virtual tea. And hopefully all of you can hear me quite well, and that we'll make do with the best we can with the technology. Just a little bit more about me. I'm originally from Colorado, and please keep my family in your prayers, as currently the fires are really close to where I grew up. I play the cello, I love to garden, I love history, I love antique maps, and I really enjoy my work here at the Dodge House. So I have nothing to share but gratitude for how fortunate I am to be involved with the Dodge House, and gratitude for all of you. A museum is not a thing in itself. A museum is made up by the people that love the museum. So in so many ways, you are the Dodge House, and you keep the past alive, you keep the past living in the present, and you keep the past ready to be interpreted by future generations. So you are caretakers and stewards. So thank you so much. The goal of today's presentation is, by the time you are done enjoying this presentation, I hope that next time you come to the Dodge House and see a picture of Ruth Ann Dodge hanging on the wall, or the next time you visit the Ruth Ann Dodge Memorial near Fairview Cemetery, that you'll have a deeper perspective and a greater emotive response, that you will know more about Mrs. Dodge and her legacy, so that you'll be able to appreciate her more on your next visit, and you'll be able to share more with friends and family as well. So that is today's goal. At this time, I'm going to begin the presentation. One moment. You should be able to see. Let's see. One moment.
I see your screen.
Everyone see my screen? Raise your hand if you can see the screen. Wonderful. It's actually working. So today we're going to learn about Ruth Ann Brown Dodge. And this presentation was created both by me, but also I adopted it from some of my predecessors. And I want to give credit to those directors and those volunteers that worked on this before me. So Ruth Ann Dodge, an amazing woman, a wife, mother, sister, traveler, daughter-in-law, army wife, friend, patron of the arts, friend of the library, wife of a congressman, suffrage supporter, and lover of the arts, reader, piano player, loved to sing, a remarkable woman. And like 10 million Americans that live today, she can trace her ancestry back to those pioneers on the Mayflower. So being a pioneer was in her blood. Her father was Warren Brown. It's amazing to think that he was born in 1791, the same year that Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart died in Austria. The year, couple years after, we became a federalist nation. And her mother was Anne Kinney, born about the same time. And if she looks a little unhappy, it might be because the year that she got married in 1814, between then and 1836, she gave birth to 10 children and raised them. No small feat in the early 19th century. And Ruth Ann was the second to last daughter to be born. She was born in 1832, a beautiful woman, and she would die in New York the same year as her husband in 1916. And this is my favorite picture of Ruth Ann, which I'm sure many of you have seen before. In all of her images, class comes to mind, dignity comes to mind. And when we go to the General's library, we can see in the family Bible their marriage recorded in 1854. And one of the gifts from Dodge's parents was this beautiful Simon Willard bride clock or banjo clock. And this is one of my favorite antiques in the house. Simon Willard was an American pioneer in making clocks. It kept amazing time. It would lose only about 1 second every 10 days. And he is the most famous clockmaker America has ever known. The clock in the middle, that is in the West Wing of the White House. The clock on the right is in Statuary Hall in Congress. He also has a clock in the old Senate chambers and the old Supreme Court chambers. A clock hangs in Monticello in Thomas Jefferson's home. And so this is really one of our prized possessions. And it was a prized possession for Dodge. As many of you know, he had that niche constructed just for that clock. And the bottom features Helios riding around the sun with its horses, according to the Greek myth. So I can't imagine. So Mrs. Dodge grew up in relative comfort and what we call maybe upper middle class for her time. And she marries this young surveyor, and they moved to the frontier, to Elkhorn. And it was the last white settlement you would see on your way to Denver. There, Dodge and Nathan and Dodge's father had claims. They farmed corn. They had a crossing. The Mormons would often cross there on the river. And they did their best to begin to build a life there. Now, Dodge picked that place because he had an idea based on his surveys for the Rock Island Railroad Company where the Transcontinental Railroad might go. And so you can imagine where Dodge was buying property. But I think there was a problem. The Native Americans in the area began to fight among themselves and began to have conflicts with the white settlers there. And after some cattle were killed, after repeated break-ins, and after some of their neighbors were murdered, Dodge decided that was enough, and they moved to a very modest, brand new city that the citizens of Council Bluffs had laid out just the year before. They moved to a dingy little town called Omaha. And it was a tough life there too, particularly the winter of 56 and 57. It's a terribly cold winter, and that kind of fine powdery snow would fill up their homes. And it was very tough for them. And so they had enough of Omaha, and so it was time to move back to civilization. And so they moved to Council Bluffs and bought a home and had a home constructed on Pierce Street. I hope no one from Omaha takes offense, but every now and then us proud Council Bluffians have to dish it back. But the Civil War soon disrupted their tranquility, and Dodge raised an infantry and an artillery units and was off as a colonel into the Civil War. And Mrs. Dodge did what she could to comfort herself and very quickly joined with others a group of ladies called the Soldiers' Aid Society, where they would make sure that the soldiers had everything they would possibly need. So bandages, pillowcases, havelocks, which is, we have one here on the soldier there. It's a wool that goes over your hat and protects your neck from the cold weather and from the sun alike. They would send anything they could to the troops. Here's an example of it on Main Street, on Broadway in Council Bluffs. In fact, they would raise dances, do plays, do readings of poetry, whatever they could to raise money to help their soldiers on the front. But there was a fight here too. The Copperheads were sympathizers, and in fact, there was a Southern newspaper that was sympathetic, the Bugle, to the Southern cause. And Mrs. Dodge got a lot of grief. And so she had to fight her own little war here as well. She wrote, "No one seems to care up here whether you resign or get shot. It would be but a few days' wonder, and then it would be all over. I guess business is very dull with Nate now. The roses and vines are all over the front yard, and the grapevine needs training. The elm trees grow beautifully, but the yard is full of rank weeds. I cannot endure the thought that I will not have a home somewhere before the year is out, but I keep hoping for better times will come before long." And that was prophetic. Better times would come before long, but not quite yet. So it gives us a sense that Mrs. Dodge is wanting for a better life, and certainly Mr. Dodge was too. But a better life is difficult on the front lines of the Civil War. People always got sick, and Dodge had to take sick leave. And one of the benefits of being in an officer is that your family could often come to stay with you and care for you. Of course, something the average soldier wouldn't benefit from. And so fortunately, almost every time Dodge was injured or became ill, Mrs. Dodge would go and join him. She writes from St. Louis, why Dodge is recovering there. She writes to Mrs. Wood, a friend of hers, and she says, "I write this to let you know that old Scamp Whelan had been to work here all about the Negroes, went and got a justice to come and take Louisa, which is a former slave, away from Mrs. J. Roberts, and has taken her off to some slave yard in another part of the city. You have no idea how it made my blood boil to hear how he treated the poor thing, made her go without a bonnet or shawl and struck her with an umbrella and made her go faster. And she expected every moment her child would be born." So this former slave, now to be reslaved, is also pregnant. "I wish you would let Colonel Wood, her husband, Mrs. Wood's husband, know all about it. I think it is horrible and outrageous, and I hope that Colonel Wood will catch him and make him suffer for it. How I would like to see him shot. My husband is quite ill and has not been up at all today, and in hopes a few weeks' rest will restore him." So this gives us a sense of Mrs. Dodge's passion, that she was very much anti-slavery and wanted people treated well, and was a feisty, strong woman. As docents like to say, one of the things that Mr. Dodge loved about Mrs. Dodge is she could ride a horse and shoot like a man. And she was a tough lady, even at a younger age. And the newspaper always kept track of her. So when she returned from St. Louis, it was noted as this steamer from Omaha docked. And they're always interested here in Council Bluffs, the goings on of Dodge and his men. Well, you may remember that Dodge, during the siege of Atlanta, peeked through a little peephole about this big, and a bullet came, grazed off the side of the building, and took off a patch of his hair. And that disturbed Mrs. Dodge greatly. And so she rushed to Atlanta, where she insisted that Sherman let her pass and see her husband. I'm going with or without you. And of course, Sherman did the smart thing and provided Mrs. Dodge with an escort. When Mrs. Dodge wanted something, she got it. And I'm going to go back one slide. She also spent some time in Corinth with her husband, known as the Crossroads of the Confederacy. There was a large, what they called a contraband camp, where slaves would go seeking their freedom. And there, General Dodge was the first Union officer to arm African-American men to fight. We think it was the 54th Massachusetts. That was the biggest one and the most famous one. But General Dodge was indeed the first to do so, at least as far as I have learned. And they had some close calls in Corinth. One moment, folks, just let me check my email here. All right. And of course, Nathan and Dodge and General Dodge were very close. And Nathan says that every time he went out, everyone wanted to know how Dodge was doing and couldn't get word, which probably is why Mrs. Dodge hurried so quickly to tend to her husband in Atlanta. And indeed, for a while, as you know, General Dodge was reported killed. After the Civil War, Dodge is transferred to Leavenworth, where he began to work on pacifying Native Americans for the Transcontinental Railroad. The folks with Union Pacific wanted him to resign the military right away and get to the business of being chief engineer. However, Dodge said, we still have to deal with the problems of making sure that Native Americans are not destroying the track and the telegraph. It's easier for me to do that in the military. But soon Dodge would resign his commission in the Army, become the chief engineer full-time. And the same year that the Transcontinental was completed, General and Mrs. Dodge moved into their home here in Council Bluffs. Those clothes don't look particularly comfortable, do they? At the time they moved into the new home, their 3 beautiful daughters looked like this. I think they look more like their mother. And a picture of the Dodge house as it appeared in the 1870s. And the beautiful china they enjoyed. I don't think I've ever seen more beautiful china. And Mrs. Dodge did not stop advocating just because the war was over. She was a lover of books and very much involved herself in creating the Free Public Library. She got private citizen to buy books, later donated to the Free Public Library, got people to donate the space, and eventually got the city council to engage in a monthly budget for it. And so without her activism and the activism of other leading ladies in Council Bluffs, perhaps Carnegie wouldn't have identified Council Bluffs as a good place to build a free public library building. We were the first city in Iowa to have a free public library, so another first for Council Bluffs. Along with women like Amelia Bloomer, shown here, Mrs. Dodge was also involved in women's suffrage, which when it happened 100 years ago was one of the greatest acts of freedom in American history we've ever seen. When she wasn't doing good in Council Bluffs, she was traveling with her husband in their private railroad car. Here we have an image of that car that General Dodge painted himself with watercolors. We don't know what happened to the car. We've looked for it, but it was probably dismantled sometime early in the 20th century. Soon she found herself with her husband at their new ranch in Marshall, Texas, as General Dodge worked on the second Transcontinental Railroad from Marshall, Texas, through Austin, El Paso, on to San Diego. And she constantly traveled. These are kind of hard to read, but it gives you a sense of their comings and goings. The Daily Bee was the Facebook in the late 1800s for the Omaha area, always on the move. And they loved to party. They had that beautiful ballroom in the house. And so they would have teas. So we are continuing a tradition today that Mrs. Dodge also enjoyed. This is an interesting report of a Christmas Eve event. The most interesting social event of the week was a domino party given by Mrs. G.M. Dodge and Mrs. R.E. Montgomery on Christmas night. The large dancing hall on the third floor was thrown open and exquisitely decorated with holly and mistletoe. The ceiling draped with flags and hung Japanese lanterns and large Japanese umbrellas. A sort of stage in one end of the room was blanketed with palms and flowers, and everywhere about crazy bowers were created tall palms and festoons of green, masses of holly and chrysanthemums. And people danced, played dominoes, wore masks. This might be interesting for the general's ladies to consider recreating for a tea or a dance. Just thinking. She loved lilacs and roses. And she spent much of her time as the 1880s and 90s progressed in a hotel in New York. The luxurious Second Empire Hotel would be one of two hotels that she would stay in, and it was close to all the theater she could get her hands on. And so could you imagine Mrs. Dodge talking to one of her New York friends, telling her about her pioneer experiences, dealing with Native Americans, dealing with Copperheads during the Civil War, and then now enjoying the elegance of the finest hotels in New York City, their apartment in Paris, their ranch in Texas, their beautiful home in Council Bluffs, and their private train car. What a change of events. She lived several lifetimes in one. And she had the comfort that many grandparents do of seeing multiple generations. They also loved a vacation in California. And here she is enjoying one of those trips out to California. And again, even in her later years, an elegant woman with a whole lifetime written upon her face. Here she is with two of her daughters, Anne and Ella. Again, that is taken in California. And she did fall ill. She was unable to return for her husband's funeral. They were certain it would have killed her. And the last time they got to see each other at length was in 1911 when she came out here for a whole summer. You know, they were very independent, and Mrs. Dodge, like her friend Amelia Bloomer, was a very independent woman. We can tell from their letters to each other that they were close, but they were very comfortable living their separate lives. And in this sense, in some regards, a very modern couple. Mrs. Dodge would pass away on this hotel that still exists at 130 East 67th Street in New York. And here is what the nonpareil wrote. Mrs. Dodge dies in her home in New York. Widow of the late general, passes away after a long illness to be buried in Walnut Hill. The body will be brought to Council Bluffs for interment. 3 daughters were at the bedside at the death of Mrs. G.M. Dodge, widow of the late General Dodge. She died at 7:15 Monday evening at her home in New York after a protracted illness. General Dodge died last January. With Mrs. Dodge at the time of her death were all 3 of her daughters, Miss Ann Dodge, Miss Frank Hussey, and Miss Letty D. Montgomery. Mrs. Montgomery, who had been summering in Idaho, went east a few days ago when her mother's condition became critical. Mrs. Pusey also went to New York a week ago. The body will be brought to Council Bluffs for burial in the family lot in Walnut Hill Cemetery and will be accompanied here by her 3 daughters. Arrangements for the funeral have not yet been made, as no definite information has been received here Tuesday morning. Mrs. Dodge had been failing in health for a long time and was so critically ill at the time of the general's death last winter that it was feared she could not survive the shock. Later, her condition improved slightly, but she never recovered and has been seriously ill for months. Mrs. Dodge was born at Peru, Illinois, May 23rd, 1833, her maiden name being Miss Annie Brown. Her acquaintance with General Dodge began when he was surveying in the Illinois, and they became engaged. They were married May 20th, 1854 in Salem, Massachusetts, when Mrs. Dodge was visiting relatives in the East. And the arrival of her remains was noted. And every year, for many, many years, her surviving daughters would put in memoriam, her children rise up and call her blessed. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. She was laid to rest in Walnut Hill Cemetery in a lovely mausoleum. And just last year, there was a family reunion, and the family came and paid their respects. And of course, famously, we have the Ruth Ann Dodge Memorial, which was erected late in 1919, and then the family had a ceremony in 1920, a private ceremony to commemorate it. Here is Ann Dodge in the 1930s at the memorial. As you know, Mrs. Dodge had 3 dreams where an angel bearing the waters of life stood on the edge, on the prow of a ship. So the marble base is a ship, there's a garland there. And the 3rd time, Mrs. Dodge took the water of life and consumed it, told her daughters of the experience, and died shortly after. I want to enjoy our last few slides talking a little bit about the Ruth Ann Dodge Memorial, if I may, because it is no doubt the most important piece of artwork we have in Council Bluffs, and arguably in all of Western Iowa and perhaps Eastern Nebraska as well. Daniel Chester French was the architect of the Ruth Ann Dodge Memorial. It cost $40,000 for it to be made. That'd be a heap of money today. And Daniel Chester French first got notoriety when he created the Minuteman statue, which stands to this day in Concord, Massachusetts, holding a gun and a plow, a quintessential image of the American Revolutionary farmer. Of course, he's most famous for the Lincoln Memorial. But Ruth Ann Dodge and many of his works were based on a young model, Audrey Munson. She was America's first famous supermodel. She was known as the American Venus, and she was the first woman ever to appear nude in a film. And indeed, she has a timeless beauty. Probably more statues in the United States have been crafted based on her image than anyone else. She was known as the Panama Pacific Girl. In 1915, the Panama Pacific Exposition had over 90 statues based on her likeness. It was held in San Francisco, and of course, it was designed to be temporary, except for a few structures that are around today. For those of you that like old coins like I do, she was the basis of the design for both the Walking Liberty half dollar and the Mercury dime. And while some people often call the statue of Mrs. Dodge the Black Angel, indeed, tragedy would come for this young lady. In 1919, her landlord fell in love with her. We don't know if she reciprocated, and the landlord murdered his wife. And quickly, Audrey and her mother escaped, ran away from New York, and the police had to track her down. In 1922, Audrey attempted suicide, And here's where it gets really tragic, my friends. In 1931, her mother had her committed to a lunatic asylum where she remained for 65 years forgotten, no visitors, and she died at the age of 104 with no gravestone. So when we refer to the statue as the Black Angel or the Angel of Death, I think our minds can go to the model, whom it was based on. Certainly not, though, for Ruth Ann. For us at the Dodge House and for Ruth Ann, it's a symbol of life and resurrection. Just a few fascinating facts about the Black Angel or the Ruth Ann Dodge Memorial, and then I'll have the decency to quit and wrap it up. There were a number of attempts by Easterners to move the monument back east. We said no. The water was turned off several times because it was so expensive. In the 50s, it was running $100 a month sometimes, but it was always turned back on eventually. Get this, in 1958, the Girl Scouts, without permission, went and painted the statue black and then wrote a press release to the nonpareil to brag about it. And in 1982, the General's Ladies attempted to get it moved to the Dodge House grounds. So again, as we wrap my presentation up today, and I thank you for your attention, this is our greatest work of art, and it's in honor of a great lady. And I hope that maybe sometime this week, you'll go and drive by it and appreciate the Ruth Ann Dodge Memorial with a little bit more awareness of what it represents, how it came to us, and deep appreciation for an amazing woman. All right. Jen, in a moment, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Tom. That was wonderful. There's things that you talked about that I didn't even know about. So just a second, I got to get my information up here. Most importantly, we want to thank our supporters and the General Ladies and the Historic General Dodge House. Without all of you, there would be no Dodge House. There are some upcoming events I'd like to make you aware of. Here we go again. Tom is, just a second. Tom will be presenting on folk artist George Simons and his paintings of early Council Bluffs in Omaha. That event will be at the Pace Center on November 5th at 6:00 p.m. We have Breakfast with Santa, and that will be on December 12th. And that's also going to be held at the Pace Center at 10:00 a.m. We're doing it at the Pace Center because we can socially distance there. Christmas by Candlelight Tours will be on December 12th and the 19th. The best way to make sure that you have an opportunity to conveniently and securely register is to ensure that you are getting our monthly e-newsletter. If you are not getting our monthly newsletter via email, you can do one of two things. You can type your name and email in the chat function on this Zoom call, or you can call the Dodge House and request to be added to our monthly e-newsletter. Again, thank you, thank you, thank you for supporting the General Ladies and the historic General Dodge House. And thank you, Tom, for the wonderful program. And everyone, please enjoy your Sunday. Have a safe and good afternoon and be safe. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Tom?
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day, folks. And I'm going to stop the recording now.